As Jesse said, my name is Jo Langford. I'm a therapist and I do sex and tech education for kids and families here around the Seattle and Pacific Northwest area, but I travel actually internationally now talking about this stuff. I love talking about this stuff. I have a ton of information for you all tonight. So I'm going to try to give you as much information as I can in the short time that we have tonight. I have a couple of disclaimers to talk about. The first one is that I am very, very aware that I am a kind of crunchy, sort of groovy American liberal, educated, West Coast, secular, cisgendered white dude. So not all of my values are necessarily going to totally mesh with your values. And I want to give you some information about what I've learned from working with kids around digital citizenship and social media, particularly tonight. One of my values, for example, is when it comes to new technology, my instincts and my experience usually point me to explore the positive ways that this stuff can be used. And then I try to make sure that any potential downsides are either well explained to my kids and clients and or balanced out with parental controls, privacy settings, and that kind of stuff. The other disclaimer is that sex and technology are now very much linked together. So much of the average kid's information about both is taken straight from the internet, and it's kind of impossible to talk about sex with kids these days without talking about technology, and it's kind of impossible to talk about technology with kids today without talking about sex. Those things are combined in a way that we probably aren't going to be able to uncombine them. It's just part of the conversation now. So as parents, this is a challenge to be sort of open and uncomfortable, which is in the job description of us as being parents. If you haven't ever had a parent moment where you had to be open or uncomfortable, this might be the first one, but it'll be okay. And then I want to talk about confidentiality. So I'm hoping to get some time to do some Q&A tonight. And I want people to feel really comfortable, even if you might know each other well or know each other kinda, to be able to just ask questions in a kind of a judgment-free way. So that is my disclaimer list. Oh, and I'm sorry, I tend to be the person who freaks people out a little bit with some of the topic matter that I discuss. So this is my apology slide there. You might see that again tonight during the talk. But tonight I want to talk about kind of an overview about teen and tween behavior in this digital age. I want to break down specifically sort of like the 10 most popular social media apps that kids are using these days. And then I want to talk about how you deal with that and how you create house rules for your family using what I call the 5 Ps. And then, like I said, hopefully we're going to be able to get to some questions. Sometimes, especially if I'm doing this live, I'll do questions as we go, but tonight I think I won't. I think I'm just going to kind of power through. I've got information from a couple of talks that I've done, and I kind of squished them together into one talk tonight. So I want to kind of do that, and then we'll save questions for the end. And I think if you have questions, you can throw them in the chat, and then Jesse can help me kind of filter through those at the end. So I want to talk about what the good and the bad and the ugly. Online life is kind of a social media maze these days. I think the internet is an awesome way for us all to grow and connect and share and be exposed to things that we're not able to if we're just left to our real lives and our non-technical devices. I'm not against that kind of connection. I'm actually a gigantic fan of the internet.
Different instrumentos tecnológicos y tipos de conexión que tenemos. Pienso que el Internet no es un juguete, es como que ponen una arma, como un carro, si muchos lo hurgan y no saben lo que están haciendo, los niños siempre no entienden. En términos de tecnología integral hablando, cuando los niños crecen, se exponen a experiencias diferentes, muchas de ellas habilidades aprendidas y otras
our online lives when the internet happened. But our kids have had a lot more technology shoved down their little throats than they've had the chance to develop the etiquette that goes along with that. And our kids view the internet differently than we do because for most of them, the internet has always been there, right? Probably since the beginning of time from their perspective. Like cave people invented like fire and then they invented Wi-Fi. Like, why would you skip any steps in between those two things? That doesn't make any sense to them, right? So to our kids, the internet has been there forever. The internet is a grown-up. The internet knows what it's doing. The internet can be trusted, right? That's not true, but our kids don't necessarily understand that, depending on what age your kid is. All of our kids are going to be online in some way, even if yours maybe are not yet. And as parents, I think it's our responsibility to develop a relationship with these things so that we can help our kids do the same, because constant connection has increased dramatically in our culture in general. We all have email, texts. Some people do the Twitter thing. It's just everywhere. And the people in, here watching this average about 28 apps on your smartphone. Some of us have a little bit more than that, and about 338 friends on Facebook. Some of us have a little bit less than that. But Facebook is kind of the most prolific form of social networking. They kind of went first. They kind of did it the best. Everyone who's come after them has been some kind of a riff on their theme. They've done a good job of evolving over time, as kind of culture and society and technology has, and they seem like they're going to be around here to stay. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining how Facebook works, but I want to start talking about it because it's sort of the grandfather of all this stuff. And even though it's a grandfather, Facebook just had its 16th birthday. So, Facebook is a teenager, yay. It just cracked 2.7 billion people, which, if I did the math correctly, means 1 out of every about 4 people on the planet are on Facebook. If Facebook were a country, it would be the largest country on the planet. When I think about online interactions, specifically with social networking, I try to sort out, what would this thing be in the real world? Like, what is its real life equivalent of this thing? And I have decided over time that I think Facebook is like a dinner party, right? Maybe a cocktail party, but it's like civilized conversation. It's chit chat. People share pictures of their kids or their cat. They talk about that enchilada they had for lunch yesterday. It's generally in the good category, I would say, meaning that most people on Facebook, I think, are using their powers for good and using Facebook the way Facebook was designed to work. It's one of the best ways for kids to cut their teeth. They kind of feel like they're being invited to the grown-up party a little bit, and they can sort of learn how to do social networking in a really kind of basic way. The big lesson and takeaway when I'm talking to kids and families about Facebook and social media in general is that the same rules apply to your online life as they do in your real life. The same manners, the same words you use with people. Your behavior online shouldn't look vastly different than it does in real life. If Facebook has the gold medal in terms of the number of users, of people who are on it, Instagram has the silver medal. It's an online photo, video sharing, social networking services that, at least when it started out, lets people take pictures, alter them digitally in cool and unique ways, and then share them in kind of like an online sort of streaming scrapbook. You're also able to share that content on other social media sites. There's 2 big pink flags that I have when I'm thinking about Instagram. One, it has a reputation even larger than Facebook's for leaning toward like culture. And a lot of kids can get their self-esteem wrapped up in that external validation, how many friends or followers they have, how many people are responding and how to the pictures that they put out. That kind of stuff. The takeaway from that is that we need to work to make sure that our kids have plenty of other in the real world ways for them to get their self-esteem needs met, so they're not tempted or stuck getting all of their self-esteem needs met through their screens, because that's just not a great recipe for positive, healthy behavior. The second flag is that when Instagram started, all the photos were private by default, and you had to choose, or were public by default, sorry. And you get to choose, when you post something, everyone who follows you can see it. But now things have changed and you can privatize things. So kids can take a picture of some specific thing and send it only to one specific person. And so some kids are going to be tempted to take pictures of things that they probably shouldn't be taking pictures of. So that's Instagram. Twitter, I put
El
also
Twitter. El Twitter es una categoría buena para la gente. Twitter, el Twitter permite a la gente colocar, hacer blogging, microblogging. Postear
80 character little messages called tweets. It's sort of like texting a big group of friends all at one time, or like Facebook didn't take its Ritalin that day. It's an awesome way to connect with people. It's a great way to keep up with what's going on in your world, in your community, even in your neighborhood. The danger with younger kids is that sense of invincibility they have and their lack of understanding that the internet is forever, which is a statement that I say more than most sentences that I say in any kind of given week. Literally, the Library of Congress archives 500 million tweets every single day for posterity. When they started doing that in, I think it was 2010, it was like 150 million tweets a day, but it's over 500 million now. Twitter, I think, is socially okay for kids with a teen in their name, as long as they know how to utilize the features that allow for private messaging, and they pay attention to who's friending and following them. And for kids who are under like 15 or 16, generally I recommend that they only friend or follow people who they've met in real life, and you kind of keep that social media circle of people pretty small until they get a little bit older. Kids are fickle. They're known for their short attention spans. We've met them. And even though they might get their sea legs with Facebook and learn how to do social media, they will very quickly jump ship and want to move on to something else. They want a space that's just their own, just like they do in real life, like the kids' table at Thanksgiving and things like that. And so instead of investing everything into one social media network, they'll kind of do everything that they need to do. They spread out amongst these more kind of specific social networking services. And one of the most popular ones with kids, as you probably know, is called TikTok. It was used to be called Musical.ly. It's a fun short form video sharing social app in which kids mostly make cute, mostly music, mostly videos. The users, they call them musers on there, record themselves dancing and pantomiming, and they build up a following of their friends who often record themselves doing their own version of the same bits. If you monitor it closely, it tends not to be a problem because monitoring is really difficult on TikTok if you're not actively engaged in it. So content on TikTok is uploaded by the millions. It is super popular right now. And through the 2020 quarantine / election year, its content definitely expanded to include things like educational content and political commentary and marketing. And a lot of grown-ups are on TikTok now as well. But primarily, it's kids goofing around and showing off and trying to make each other laugh and pay attention to each other. Not all of the content on TikTok is G-rated. Exposure to adult lyrics and language is pretty common there. Most of the calls and the emails I get about TikTok are about parents sort of understandably upset, watching their preteen channeling Britney Spears or listening to their 10-year-old singing Kanye West lyrics, things like that. But my biggest concern with TikTok is really that sort of kind of addictive pull of getting exposure, getting approval from people that you don't know necessarily, earning new followers. That temptation, I think, is a problem sometimes for kids. And you can pretty much bank on the fact that any site or app, including TikTok, that is designed for kids or populated heavily by them is going to attract predators to it. The internet is kind of like the modern version of that windowless creeper van from the 80s. That's not a reason to have your kids not be on social media, but it is a reason to talk to them about doing it safely and doing it smartly, just like our parents did with parks. They did not let us go to the park. They talked to us about how to be safe at the park, right? TikTok is mostly creative and a really fun way to keep up with what's cool and what's over and what's new and but it's important to talk about what's okay and what's not okay in terms of behavior on the internet. It's important to talk about self-esteem and self-care, and it's important to talk to kids, especially the younger ones, about what they need to do if something bad happens or something they encounter that makes them feel uncomfortable. But with conversation, with clear expectations, with age-appropriate monitoring, TikTok shouldn't be a problem for most people. Another one I want to talk about tonight is called GroupMe. It's a messaging app that's designed to allow people to share, wait for it, group messages, right? That happens. They're able to create message groups of any size. It can be you and your best friend. It can be you and your soccer team. It can be the cousins. It can be the whole 6th grade class. Members of groups can share messages, emojis, updates, locations. It is a kind of a mix between maybe like the Zoom call and texting. While group texting isn't necessarily dangerous in and of itself, it can really be a motivating factor for accidental social disaster. Mean messages can be weaponized. The popularity contests can happen on it with kids, like who's included or who's not, because sometimes it's like the whole 6th grade class, except for Becky, right? I'm not a fan of the big kid group text thing, but I don't have a lot of control over our culture, unfortunately. If I did, football season would last all year long, and talking online on your phone while you're in line at Starbucks would be illegal, and WandaVision would have dropped all at once so we could see the whole thing, but I digress. It's way too easy for group chats to hit a snag that creates a misunderstanding, that creates drama, that gets people's feelings hurt, especially with kids. When kids start interacting digitally in that kind of way, it can really devolve into one big giant poop emoji over time, because they just don't have the social skills to understand it. There's so much of communication that doesn't happen through text anyway. And so when there's a bunch of kids on there just like saying stuff, you can almost bet that somebody's going to get their feelings hurt and something's going to go wrong. GroupMe can be a great way to keep in touch, to organize study groups, or take care of like an activity of some kind. But it's really important, I think, to empower kids with the knowledge on how to group chat responsibly and how to handle the problems that will inevitably occur, and under what circumstances that might need to bail and leave the group chat. House Party is another one I want to touch on tonight. House Party is a rebooted version of a defunct live streaming app that was called Meerkat, that most of you probably don't remember or have never heard of. House Party has been around for about 5 years now, and basically it is designed to let you host video calls with a group of friends, super similar to Zoom or Google Hangouts, which at this point we're all very familiar with now. It's nothing earth-shatteringly new. Basically, it is just like a group text with kind of Skype-y elements to it. So you can text while you're video chatting, which makes it a great tool for study groups and for gossip. It is public and open, much like Zoom. So you create a room like we have tonight, where all you and all your friends can have a conversation, but the door doesn't lock. So anybody can come in. So tonight there was an invitation, you got an invitation, you clicked on the link and you came here, and here we are. But with House Party, anybody can find a chat and just jump in. So you notice that somebody you don't know comes into the room, or someone you don't like comes into the room, you can leave, but you can't necessarily lock that door. And so the content, the level of helpfulness, the appropriateness on House Party really depends on who the kid is communicating with and who is in that room with them. In the real world, it would be somewhere between like hanging out at somebody's house after school and those packs of the middle schoolers that kind of take over the Starbucks in the afternoons after school. You know, the content of their conversations can be kind of silly, and they can get loud, and they can get kind of less than appropriate. And they often seem to forget that they are in public still. So for House Party, I'm kind of reluctant about middle schoolers using it. It's more of a high school thing. And, you know, and the kids, even if they are high school age, should sort of be reminded again that those real world manners apply, even more so on social media, because House Party is definitely live and definitely public. So those are kind of the ones that are most popular right now that kids are using, that I would put in the good category. The bad category, it's important to be wary of these apps. Like these ones start to kind of mess with kids' self-esteem. It puts them at risk for humiliation, for bullying, and for legal issues. So that is my operating definition of a bad app. One of the ones I want to talk about on this list is LiveMe. So LiveMe is a live streaming video app that allows you to watch or broadcast videos very similar to TikTok, very similar to YouTube, but different than TikTok, whose main purpose is specifically like lip syncing or performance. LiveMe lets you do kind of anything you want. And kids are rewarded, or any user on there is rewarded with like virtual coins or gifts that watchers can give them that they can turn into actual cash. And that helps raise your popularity on the app, getting you more and more and more followers. So because of that emphasis on popularity, there's a percentage of kids who are going to be tempted to do things that are more sexy, more silly, more scandalous with their live streaming in order to get those followers and get those rewards and hopefully turn them into cash. Nudity is a pretty regular feature on this app, as you can guess. I don't know anybody who's used this app and has not seen kind of a pretty steady stream of nude images. But there's also physical dangers with kids who kind of resort to doing really dangerous kind of jackass show style antics to get that attention. So LiveMe can seem like a way for younger children to wade into social media, kind of like TikTok, but it is not. It's much more dangerous, and kids are tempted to do a lot more stuff that they wouldn't do that is not safe or not smart than they would in real life. So I kind of tell people to sort of look sideways at that, if not avoid it altogether. And then there's Snapchat, which I'm guessing most of you have heard of. It's been around for quite a while, incredibly popular. But thousands and thousands and thousands of kids have been lured into a false sense of security around Snapchat. It's a wildly popular instant texting app that is marketed directly to teens, kind of actually shoved down their throat in kind of a marketing way. On Snapchat, you can text images and videos, you can draw on them, you can give them captions, you can tag people, you can send them to your friends. And the understanding is that you can set a timer, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then the post will disappear magically into the ether, never to be seen again. So the message that kids get from that is that there's no consequences, right? The posts, which they call snaps, are mostly just like kids, again, screwing around and being silly, but it has a really potent reputation as a safe way for kids to sext and share nude and inappropriate photographs of themselves because they disappear. And so they're not going to get in trouble. That's the message that they have. As grown-ups, we understand that you lose all control of a picture once you send it out on the internet, but kids don't always know or understand or believe that. And Snapchat encourages this behavior. And one thing that I'm kind of reminding people about Snapchat is that it has had a massive boost in popularity in the last like 2 or 3 years. And so Facebook still has that gold medal that I talked about earlier, but Instagram now has the silver medal, and Snapchat actually took the bronze medal away from Twitter. So what's important to understand about that is for kids, especially teenagers, not being on Snapchat can actually be an enormous social statement that can literally isolate a kid from a significant chunk of their peers. It can be really hard to be a young person and not be on Snapchat. So that's a problem. It is also totally possible for a kid to be on Snapchat and have totally fine, totally safe, totally appropriate behavior. But there are so many people on Snapchat not doing that it becomes very confusing to people who are new to social media or young. So Snapchat, I think, should be reserved for high school age kids who have shown some good judgment and some level of maturity. My joke is that if a kid is like old enough to have their driver's license, they can drive a car, they're probably responsible enough to drive Snapchat. But those are the ugly ones that I want to talk about tonight. I mean, the bad ones. Now I want to talk about the ugly ones. So in my books, I teach teens to be wary of apps that encourage them to mask their identity, that promotes cruel behavior, that encourages them to lie, to break the law, or makes it easy for them to be located by people that they don't know online. So that is my definition of an ugly app, okay? I think using these apps gives your time, your energy, your money to developers who encourage irresponsible behavior and who take advantage of stupid people and support the predators that prey on those people. So the first one I want to talk about tonight is Blender. You may not have heard of this, but it's definitely an icon to watch for on your kid's phone. Blender falls into the dating and the hookup app category. It's relatively straightforward, location-based app where people can make friends and chat and eventually meet for a date, with the unique spin of working in conjunction with your Facebook credentials. So you browse your friends' Facebook lists, and find other people to go out with. So it's sort of like in the real world would be like the notes we passed to each other in 7th grade, asking our friends if their friend would go out with us. It is designed for adults to chat and flirt and meet new people, it says, through mapping and GPS location services. So I know I'm talking fast, but in case you missed it, the big red flag words in that sentence were adults, meet, and GPS location. None of those things are great when you mix them with children. So Blender uses the typical dating app swipe functions like Grindr and Tinder, where you swipe left or you swipe right. And you swipe left if you don't think they're foxy, and you swipe right if you do think they're foxy. And if you swipe right on them and they swipe right on you, then it's a match, and the app encourages you to meet up in real life. So apart from that sort of kind of cringiness of trolling your friends' Facebook feeds for dates, hookup apps are not for minors, right? So Blender is a no-no app. Another one is Meet Me. So Meet Me is another location-based, teen-focused dating app, much like Facebook with the profile and you getting the followers, but unlike Facebook or other that are designed to get you to connect with people that you already know, Meet Me is specifically designed to get strangers to meet and interact, right? Of the last 10 kids who were ended up in my office because they got into legal trouble through their social media feeds, 3 of them got into trouble because of their behavior on Meet Me. So one of my biggest concerns with it, other than legal issues that can happen, is once kids make a profile on here, it is public by default, including their location, and that is not explained very well in the app. And so a lot of kids are just walking through the world shouting out their location to anyone on that app, and they don't understand that they're doing it, right? In fact, the developers have actually been sued a bunch of times because of their lax privacy. And behavior on this app has resulted in several sex crimes in several states, but it gets worse. There's a popularity rating that gets assigned to you when you make a Meet Me profile, from very low to average to very high, based on your activity. And so the users are then encouraged to increase their popularity on Meet Me by paying actual money to step into what they call the spotlight, which shouts your profile out to a bunch of strangers, or playing a match game where you fish for secret admirers to click on your profile. This app is creepy. It's a very immature take on what I think is mature behavior, like online dating, and effectively trains kids to, like, at best, seek approval from strangers, and at worst, to not be worried about meeting them in real life at all. It is bad news. Meet Me is a very dangerous app, I would say, for kids, even high school kids. So kind of keep those in mind. And so those are the 10 biggest apps that kids are using today, right now. There's, of course, other ones, and they might come up in the questions, we'll see. But I've got some other resources about this stuff as well. So there's my apology slide. I'm sorry for freaking you out. That kind of stuff is out there. But now I want to talk a little bit about how do we balance that out and make things safer for our kids when they're online. And I do know I'm talking really fast. I hope the interpreters are able to keep up with me. Let me see. Okay. So you can raise your hand down in there in the chat if you want to hear some more bad news, but I'm going to anyway. So 100% of teens who have a teen in their name have used some kind of social media in some shape, way, or form. 90% of them have posted a picture of themselves online. 80% of American kids check their device at least once an hour. Most grown-ups do too. 70% of kids have shouted their location to somebody that they didn't know on the internet, either on purpose or accidentally. 60% of them, when you ask them in studies, are not at all worried about having done that. 50% of them have had a stranger reach out to them from the internet and contact them in some way. 40% of them have lied about their age. 30% of them argue with their parents every single day about their screen time. 20% of American kids have posted their phone number on the internet, and another 10% has shared enough sensitive information online that it caused a problem for them or someone in their family. So this stuff is bad news, right? But it's not necessarily a signal to avoid technology or to protect our kids from the internet. What I think it is a call to start the tech talk, or rather the tech talks, right? Much like the sex talks. It's a bunch of regular, smaller talks, ideally that we start doing as soon as we put a connected device into our kids' hands. Because with some active and mindful parenting strategies, those devices can be used in a really positive way. And I do this professionally. I'm a therapist. I work with law enforcement and police and juvenile courts. Like, I am very aware of and I deal with the dark side of social media, especially with kids, on a regular weekly basis. And I also think, like I said earlier, the internet is a great way for us to connect and grow and share. There's a lot of good stuff about the internet. Studies show that accessible social media helps build friendships more than it destroys them. That's been a kind of a consistent thing. Screens actually double the chances of a kid reading every single day, which I personally think is awesome. There's science that tells us that it increases the emotional well-being of adolescents, especially for kids who lean a little bit introverted or a little bit shy. And as many of us have been sitting at home for a year during a quarantine, well, we can appreciate that, right? A lot of us have been able to kind of get through some really rough times in this quarantine because of being able to do things like this talk here tonight. Not to mention also, like, obviously exposure to multicultural information and experiences. Social media also helps us stay connected to friends and family. It helps kids meet and interact with other people who share their interests, like groups and clubs and teams. It can help kids up their creativity through sharing of their ideas, their music, and their art. It can provide a really validating emotional support network, especially for kids who live in isolated areas or who may belong to a minority group in their community, especially like LGBT kids. Having online communities really can save lives in that kind of way. And for kids in general, just to be able to show off their talents and their skills and their strengths, even with silly TikTok dances, it's just a nice way for kids to show the world how awesome they are. And I think all of that is terrific. When done properly, the internet can provide 5 essential elements of adolescent self-esteem. So it gives them a control over their, like a sense of control over their environment, individuation, so kind of growing and figuring out who they are and who they want to be in the world, self-expression, a connection to other humans, and acceptance. So those 5 things are super important in the real life. Hopefully we're finding ways for our kids to find these elements, but also they're very easily found in healthy ways online as well. Like I said, I'm not against that kind of connection. It's just important to remember as grown-ups that our experience is different than our kids in terms of manners. And most of the problems that I deal with clients and families, when I boil them down to the bones, are about manners online. So again, thinking about how much technology our kids deal with, and even though that they are really used to it, they're really comfortable with it, and they are really good at the technical aspects of things, like how everything works and plugs in and where the cables go and how you access the stuff. When it comes to the part about interacting with other people, and the manners and those social skills on the other side of their screens, they still need our help with that stuff. Kids do not just naturally know how to do that, right? So I think one of the main points of technology is to make our lives easier and make our efforts more fruitful, right? And at some point, which I think for kids is around age 10, um, at least like getting into fifth grade, thinking about middle school down the road when you can see middle school coming around the corner. I think it's really important to sit down with our kids and find ways to remind them that tech is a tool. It's not just a toy. That is a big picture kind of mental leap that our kids cannot make on their own. There needs to be an on purpose, hand on the shoulder, look at my face conversation about using their screens in a different way. Um, in my experience, most parents interact with their kids' online lives mostly related to the expense of the devices or setting limits on their time or their data, using a screensaver, plugging it in, that kind of stuff. And typically not having enough kind of high quality conversations with their kids about what their online interactions actually look like with other people. And so tonight, I want to give you some pointers about creating some family policies. So some families have an open door stance, where all the accounts and all the passwords are known. They do spot checks on their kids' phones. They look through their photos, all that stuff. Some parents are on the other side of the line, and they say, we recommend letting them figure it out on their own. Health, like in most things, I think lies somewhere in the middle. And as we've talked about, there's tools and blocking software that can lock everything down, but the benefits of having clear guidelines that everybody in the family can adhere to, including clarity, as well as it helps with the pushback from the kids. I'm a huge fan of contracting for behavior. If any of you've seen me talk before, if you've checked out my website, I love contracting with kids. And when we're talking about online behavior, it works really, really well. And so it helps us get clear about our values. It helps us maintain our behavior and think of ourselves as role models as well. And it really helps with the kids, because if they have a voice and they have an opportunity to kind of help make the rules, they are much more likely to follow those rules, right? And any teachers, I think, listening know this when you're creating classroom rules at the beginning of the year. Um, it also helps if the kids have a voice in creating what are the consequences if they do screw up or when they screw up, right? Uh, they're much less likely to complain about the consequences if they got to have a voice in creating what those consequences are. There's so many positives to contracting for behavior with kids. I just love it so much, and I can't recommend it enough. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about next, because kids will screw up, right? The biggest benefit, though, I think, of contracting with kids is modeling, because we are all trying to control our media use, and we're all doing screens more than what is typical. Most people are having a lot more screen time in the last year than they've ever had before. And if we want our kids to be practicing like the basic social norms, they need to be able to see us doing that stuff as well. And so contracting as a family really helps us think about our behavior as well when we do it with our kids. Basic stuff like no texting while driving, no posting pictures of other people without consent on the internet, not having your technology off the dinner table, whatever those rules are for your family and your values. We want our kids to see us doing those things as well, right? It doesn't work to tell your kid not to text while they drive if you text while you drive, because they're going to see you and they're going to notice. So whether we're talking about being online or getting a kid's first smartphone or starting to splash around with some social networking, house rules should revolve around creating philosophies and then regular conversation that we come back to around what I call the 5 Ps. So the first P on this list is propriety. So this would be what people refer to as netiquette, or the social behavior, like the
Es tener etiquette o
right?
tener
So
etiqueta.
rules,
Apropiarse.
most of us
comportamientos apropiados. Estas reglas que la mayoría de nosotros de los
long they're online and how and who they're talking to, right? All that kind of stuff would fall into this category. I really like and promote the 9 to 9 rule. I don't know if anybody else had that growing up, but in my house when I was a kid, it was kind of, rude to call somebody before 9 a.m. and it was kind of sort of rude to call somebody after 9 p.m. My mom called it the 9 to 9 rule. And I don't think that things need to be any different than that just because we walk around with our phones in our pockets and they don't plug into the wall all the time. I think the 9 to 9 rule is still a great rule. I think reminding kids that the number of friends that they have on Instagram is not a contest or a real world badge about how popular or cool or foxy they are, even though to them it really can feel like that, right? So an expectation such as only friending or following people that you've actually met in a real life is a really great example. It really helps kids to
de
have
gente ayuda a los niños tener una línea en la arena.
for example, I am on Facebook and I have my work Facebook, which I will friend anyone who wants to hear me talk about this stuff. But then I have my personal Facebook page, which is quite small, very small. My rule for myself with my personal Facebook page is if I wouldn't have that person over to my house for dinner or I wouldn't buy them a birthday present, I'm not friends with them on Facebook, right? And so, you know, that guy that sat behind me in math class in 10th grade who like friends me on Facebook, like I'm not going to friend him back on Facebook because he doesn't meet that criteria for me. So helping kids come up with what their criteria is and hopefully a criteria that meshes with your value system is really important. Um, Basic kind of philosophy rules, and again, things that kids can latch their brains onto, like never open an attachment on an email from somebody that you don't know, never post anything that you wouldn't want grandma to read. That kind of stuff really helps kids. Just how do you behave online, right? If anyone has had to help their parents learn how to deal with the internet, like some of us are in kind of like a strange age cohort where I've had to teach not only my kids how to be online, but I've had to also teach my parents how to be online and say things, like, Mom, when you type things in all capital letters, it means that you're shouting. Stop doing that. That kind of stuff. All those stuff. We also want to make sure that we are passing down to our kids as well. And if you have to help your parents learn how to drive the internet, more power to you. I understand your pain. I am right there with you. I had to help my mom attach a photo to an email over Zoom a couple of months ago, and I thought I was going to have to light myself on fire. It was a mess. But we all survived. The second P that I want to talk about is presentation. So this is about helping kids kind of balance their online versus their sort of real identity, right? And generally, like I said earlier, there shouldn't be a big, huge difference between those two things, right? It really helps kids to explain, like, you shouldn't act, say things, do things, dress, appear, whatever on your screen very differently than you do in real life, right? So having preset expectations, particularly about what pictures they post of themselves, really helps, right? So talk about pictures. We are in a very visual culture right now. Everything is video based as we are sitting here having a Zoom meeting, right? And so it's really imperative that you talk to your kids about the kinds of pictures that they're putting online of themselves, talking to your kids about their values, right? And looking at their pictures and saying, hey, this is a great picture. You actually look really great in this picture, but what is the message you're trying to send? What do you want other people to think about you when you put this picture out online? And having really clear expectations for them about the amount of skin and or nudity that you are okay with your kids showing online. I have a family that I was working with. They had a great thing. They called it the swimsuit rule. So they said anything that is more revealing than a swimsuit or less, there has to be a family member in the picture with you. And that was such a great guideline. I thought, not only does it help the kids sort of keep in mind, like, oh, there's other people in the world that could possibly see this picture, but it gives them that line in the sand of, oh, can I post this or can I not post this? Because things can get so tempting when kids are by themselves or they're engaging with somebody that they're interested in. or being engaged by somebody who's interested in them, things can become very tempting and get on a menu that wouldn't be there otherwise. And while we're at it, I would say no cameras in bedrooms. That's a huge no-no. So many problems happen when kids are allowed to have cameras in their bedrooms. And I know right now with schoolwork, like lots of kids are in their bedrooms doing Zoom school and remote schooling and all that kind of stuff. But, at night, like kind of take them back, plug them in downstairs, something like that. Having a camera in a kid's bedroom at night can be really tempting for the wrong kid. But in this category of P, the presentation category, talking about the differences between truth and lies, fake news and what's real, all that kind of stuff would fall into some of this category as well. And honesty in profiles, I think, is very important. Not necessarily last names, but at a minimum, when kids are interacting over social media or Zoom, having a value that, like, on the screen, like, you put your real first name. If Billy is 14 and he says he's Billy and he says he's 14, then Billy is much more likely going to act like Billy and not say things that Billy wouldn't say and not do things that Billy wouldn't do. And if there's some kind of bad guy out there that's looking for him, then that's a different conversation. We can have that conversation. But if there is an older person who's looking at someone and they just think that they're like hot or foxy or something like that, but then they see that they're actually 14 and not like 19, like maybe they thought, they're just going to keep scrolling. And then it just avoids a lot of problems. So real first names, real ages, I think, are important to insist on. The third P that I want to talk about is privacy. And so rules in this category would be things about like credit card usage and spending. Like, do they have access to your bank account on your Xbox? Like that kind of stuff. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. And talking about allowances or spending, where they get their money and what they spend it on and where it comes from, that would fall into this category. Password sharing would also fall into this category. It's very important. There's a phenomenon sometime with kids where they share their passwords, and it is just not a good thing. I promote what I call the diaper rule. I tell, like, my kids, I said, you do not share your password with anyone who didn't or won't eventually change your diaper, period. Because what happens is kids say, we've been dating for 3 whole weeks and we're in love, so I gave her the password to my Twitter feed. What could go wrong, right? No, don't do that. It's not a good idea. So keeping passwords private is very important to tell kids. Privacy policies with social media, especially things like Facebook, kind of change on an unnecessarily regular basis. And so it's important to kind of sit down, not only have a conversation about what privacy means for your family, but what privacy settings you're okay with on their social media feeds, and try to think about things the way a predator would. So sometimes, like especially now in the last year when I'm with clients, and we'll talk about safety stuff, and I can say, oh, we're Zooming right now. I can see like your desk and your bedroom and stuff. And I can tell from your bedroom, like I can see your Letterman jacket. So I know what school you go to. I can tell what sport you play. I can find out online what time that group has practice, and I can find a lot of information about you, where you're going to be, where you work, where you go to school, like all that kind of stuff, just from the pictures or the videos that they share online. So having kids think about what messages and information they're giving apart from just like their face, which is what they tend to be preoccupied with, right? And to kind of think about the content that they're sharing as a predator would. Not only the location sharing that they can do with some of those apps and websites, frankly, but also, like how much personal information are they sharing? Most kids understand, don't share things like your phone number on the internet. There still happens with some kids, but most kids understand like that's not a really smart thing to do. But a lot of kids will like post things like, oh man, it's 9:30 and I'm off work now. I can't play. What a long day, right? And now somebody out there who they don't know understands like that they get off work at 9:30 on Tuesday nights or whatever it is, right? So it's important to be thinking about that kind of stuff. A quarter of us, 25% of us grown-ups statistically have posted our kids' photos online with their names. That can seem pretty harmless, and for the most part, it is. It's not going to end up be a big deal, but it is important as our kids get a little bit older to be more choiceful about this. And at some point, your kids are probably going to say, "Stop sharing pictures of me. I don't like that picture. Take it down, or don't put it up." But we also can add a certain level of safety when we kind of do things like maybe be vague with our kids' names on Facebook or use nicknames for them or something like that. It's also nice, I think, in terms of privacy to role model some of that consent and say things like, "That face you made was hilarious," or "That outfit, you look really, really cute in that. Are you okay if I put your picture on my Facebook feed?" Right? And make sure you're asking permission and role modeling how to get consent from other people before you post someone's picture online. And again, 10, 11 years old, as soon as they get to that age, it's a great time to start doing that if you haven't already. Privacy is a weird word when I talk about it. It's one of the words when I'm seeing kids in therapy sessions that I kind of make them hold up their hands and do sarcastic quotation marks like privacy, right? Because there is no real privacy, right? And so for parents, when I work with them, I sort of encourage them to talk about privacy with kids as if it doesn't really exist, right? There's no privacy like big picture on the internet, right? When you share something online, it is not private by default. Like the chance is always there that someone can see that information. And privacy in the house. I do think kids deserve privacy and need privacy. I think it's important for kids. But when it comes to interacting on their phones, I think parents get to check phones. Parents get to look at text threads. Parents delete history, not kids. We get to look at their pictures. That's the price of admission in the house for you having a smartphone, that we get to check it, right? Kids hate that. I get hate mail all the time, but it is a really important way to think about parenting in this digital age, right? And when you explain to kids, like it's like a car, right? No kid thinks that they are going to have their parent just say, "Here's the car keys, go learn how to drive, good luck, have fun." No kid thinks that that is the expectation, and no parent would ever do that because that's bananas, right? That would not end well. But a lot of kids do think that's it. They get a phone for Christmas or for their birthday, and they're like, "Thanks, mom and dad, see ya." And they're out, right? And they don't expect there's going to be a conversation necessarily. But kids can do just as much damage with a phone as they can with a car. And so when I work with families, I encourage them to say, while you're learning to drive this thing, I'm going to be in the passenger seat with you, and I'm going to be watching and checking just like I would in a car until I see you make some mistakes. I see you fix those mistakes. I see you doing mature behavior, and you get to a certain level of mastery where I can trust that you're doing this. Okay. And then you can go off and do it by yourself. But until then, I'm going to be here with you, learning and watching you grow. And kids can start to understand it when you explain it to them that way. But it's a rough conversation. It can be a rough conversation when you first start out. But I really do think that random checks on profiles, their texts, it's the admission price for them having a phone. So don't be afraid to do that. The fourth P that I want to talk about is property. So a lot of homework stuff kind of falls into this category. Plagiarism, giving credit where credit is due, pirating things like music or movies, having conversations with kids about their values. Are you going to just sort of rip that movie off of the internet, or are you going to save up your allowance and buy it and support that artist that you say that you admire? Those kinds of kind of philosophical conversations would fall into play with the property thing. And then the last one is palette. So this is about helping kids learn to make choices about what they consume on the internet and citing their sources, figuring out where their lines are. And sometimes we put the kids in the driver's seat for this conversation is very interesting and very helpful when we ask them, what are your values about this stuff? How do you make choices? How do you tell the difference between a website that can be trusted with information and a website that's full of a bunch of crap? Ask the kids how they decide that stuff. Bullying and witness issues would fall into this category. How much damage do you need to see somebody doing to another person on the internet before you step in and do something about it? If you step in and do something about it, what does that look like? Where's the button on this app to block where's the button on that Xbox game in order to report someone who's being gross or inappropriate. Talking kids through these kinds of things is really helpful. When kids are in my office and I'm talking to them about this stuff, only 1 kid out of 10 statistically, 9 kids out of every 10 that I see can't tell me, when I say, oh, okay, that happened on you. So on Instagram, how do you block and report? They go, oh, I don't really know, right? So if your kid and let your kid be on Instagram, then sit down and learn Instagram with them, figure out where the block and report buttons are and teach them how to use it. So if they do, when they do, because they will, right? That they know how to do that and how to do it well. On websites, apps, game systems, all that kind of stuff. It's a very important skill in this digital age that we are in to know how to do that. And then generally just sort of thinking about, in terms of palette, like what is the difference between appropriate and inappropriate? Like how does our family define healthy versus unhealthy, right? Those are words that we talk a lot about. We say them out loud. We throw them around kind of willy-nilly. But again, when kids are sitting in my office and I say, what's the difference between something that's healthy and not healthy? They can't really tell me. So take an opportunity with your family as a group, as a team, to sit down and kind of define some of these words, right? Can really, really help kids online and us as well with our online behavior. And a lot of us do this with food, right? A lot of families have conversation about what's healthy food and what's unhealthy food, right? My kids, sometimes eat things like Fruit Loops, right? We got Oreos last weekend, right? But when we're really clear, when I talk to my kids, like Oreos are not food, right? Like you can eat them and not die, but Oreos are not a healthy snack. That's like a treat that we do every once in a while. And then we look at Oreos very differently than we do like made like by hand food. So, talking about whatever your family's values are in terms of food, in terms of online consumption, just like the stuff that they're putting into their bodies, I think is a really important conversation to have. So I'm not tracking time very well, but I think we've got some time. This is my website, beheroes.net. There's lots of resources on there if you want to check them out. I am on the Facebook and the Twitter. I've got a bunch of books out there around for kids, like sex and development, growing up. And there's all my books have sections in the back that are just for parents. That orange one, the Tech Talks, lands on a bunch of the stuff that we talked tonight. So it's an ebook that I'm actually offering free during the quarantine. You can download it from Amazon or my website, and it's free during the quarantine. But it'll help you kind of set a tone in your family, like knowing which things to hit on when you're dealing with kids and raising them in a digital age. I have a podcast I'd like to tell you a little bit about called Appropriate, which I do versions of what we did tonight. So every episode is a specific social media app, and I do kind of a deep exploration and dive from a parenting perspective on them. So if you have an app that you find you have a question about, I'm sure I have an episode in the iTunes store of that. You can check that out. And I have a new app for kids, a safety app called Beheroes 411, also in the Apple Store. So, Jesse, are you there? Do we have time? Any questions or things people want to talk about? I don't know how you want to handle that. Do we have time for some questions?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. So the way that this works, if anybody is in the attendee section, would like to raise their hand, you use a little raise hand icon in the bottom of the screen, and you can ask a question or make a comment to Jo.
Terrific. And I can't see the chat box.
Oh, there isn't a chat. Folks would would verbally make a comment.
Use their actual voices.
I mean, as a parent of 2 teenagers in the school, I would just like to say how much I really appreciated what you had to say, and a lot of your suggestions and advice of how to practice digital citizenship in the household. We have followed and have done that, and I like the idea of being involved in here, I'm gonna unmute my video so it's not so weird. Being involved in what your kids are viewing online, you know, would that be like looking over their shoulder or just talking about it, being really open? And you know, like it is like, you know, the keys to the car can be taken away and we can inspect the car at any time, you know, and it all of you know, I think that parents I don't know, it's good to have courage for me with my kids and to have those conversations and transparency. And I think that shows
Well,
respect as well.
yeah, and I you know, I was talking to a family last week, and I kind of said, you know, it can be Christmas or cancer, right? Depending on how you approach these things. Like you can say like, what are you doing online? You know, in like an inspector kind of cop kind of way, that you're sort of like looking over their shoulder and wanting to get into their business. Or you can say, what are you doing online? And it can just be a conversation that you're having because you're like genuinely curious, right? You know, I tell families, if your kid's going to be on Instagram, like get on Instagram. If your kid wants to do Twitter, get on Twitter. If you're not already, do it with them. The TikTok dances and stuff, hilarious and super fun and kind of hard, and a great way to spend time with your kids during quarantine. And it's a, you know, when you do things like that, in a way that it just becomes part of the conversation you have, it's a really sweet window into our kids' lives and what they're doing and what their interests are, right? So, you know, if you do it and promote it in a healthy, fun, this is what we do as a family kind of way, kids don't care. They don't mind typically.
And one thing I heard tonight that I hadn't heard before and I really liked was cameras in bedrooms, and really
Yeah.
understanding that all these computers, everything has a camera in it nowadays, and you know, a lot of student computers have restrictions on them, but still, you know, you know, it's a good, you know, when I check out computers to students at the school, I always tell them, now make sure at night you put this away outside of your bedroom. And but I wasn't even thinking about the whole camera aspect, which is really a smart idea.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very confident every picture that I've ever dealt with that got a kid in trouble in some way, it was not taken in the kitchen. It was not taken in the living room, right? It's bedrooms, it's bathrooms, and it's like, you know, you see timestamps. It's like 11:30, 12:15, you know, at 4 o'clock on, you know, in the living room in front of everybody else. They're not taking scandalous pictures of themselves. So
We do have a hand raised, and this is Martha.
hey, Martha.
Hi. Let's say that you are a parent that didn't set boundaries around technology at home early on when kids first got phones. So whether that was late elementary school or middle school, now there's a problem and you want to dial it back, rein it in, try to set some boundaries where there haven't been any before. What would be your advice for parents in that situation?
That is a great question, Martha. It actually can be really fun. So you can just, my advice generally, I would just say, think outside the box, just kind of get creative with it, because no matter what's going on in your life, in the world, like there's always an excuse to do this, right? And so now you can go home and say like, oh my gosh, I heard this like guy Joe giving a talk last night, and he's awesome and muscular and handsome, and he told me that all this stuff, and so this is what I'm going to do now, right? I want to encourage people not to panic and go crazy. Like sometimes I get parents who like, we went home and salted the earth and started completely from scratch, and there's 100 rules that we do now. Just breathe through it, right? Just kind of just take your time and just make little changes as you go. But if you do have a kid or situation in your house where you do really need to say like, we're going to hit the brakes and we're going to just do this a little bit differently, get creative with it. You know, I like today in my house, I don't know wherever Buddy is listening to this or what the weather's like up there, but you know, here it was like 60 degrees outside, still a little bit chilly, but it was like sunny and the birds were singing, and we opened up the windows and had fresh air blowing through the house for the first time in months, right? It was glorious. And so it's springtime, right? Springtime is right around the corner. You can kind of tell. So you can say, hey, you know what? It's springtime. You know, we are going to do things differently. It's been a time out of time. It's been a whole year. We've been in quarantine, but now we're going to start getting back into real life. You know, there's vaccines and people are starting to open up a little bit more. So we're just going to try to get back to some regular human computer screen time usage in the family. You can use kids' birthdays, back to school, Labor Day, you know, school's over, it's summertime. We're going to do a change in how we do screen time. Hey, summer's over, it's back to school. We got to buckle down. We're going to do some different rules for screen time. You know, anything like that. You can do New Year's, you can do anything. So just kind of be creative with whatever's going on with you. But springtime, right? It's a great time for new change and spring cleaning and doing it differently. So that's what I would say. Spend a couple of weeks figuring out what you want the rules to be and how you want to do them, and then bring it up in a couple of weeks with the excuse of springtime.